I never thought a quiet Tuesday morning would end with half the neighborhood screaming, HOA sirens blaring, and the sheriff standing barefoot in his destroyed living room while the ruins of my 100-year-old oak tree sat comfortably on top of his roof like it owned the place. But that's exactly what happens when you live under the reign of HOA. Karen, the self-appointed queen of our subdivision, who believes every blade of grass, every mailbox color, and apparently every century-old tree must obey her definition of acceptable aesthetics. That oak tree wasn't just a tree, it was a family relic, older than every house on our street, and Karen hated it with a passion that honestly should have been studied by scientists. So, when I walked outside and found it cut down in the middle of the night, I lost it. But fate wasn't done, because when Karen tried to drag the giant trunk off my property, she miscalculated spectacularly and sent it crashing straight into the sheriff's house. And that's when everything exploded. Before we dive in, drop your location and local time in the comments, and if you love HOA drama, make sure to subscribe for more wild stories every week. If you've never dealt with an HOA election, let me save you the trouble. It's like a high school popularity contest, mixed with tax season and a dictatorship. But with worse outfits, ours used to be pretty harmless. Old Mr. Thompson was the previous president, and his biggest enforcement action was sending out a friendly reminder email when someone left their trash can out for 2 days. Then he moved to Florida, and the board announced elections for a new president. That's when Karen smelled power. She'd only lived in the neighborhood for a year, but you'd think she built the place with her bare hands the way she talked about my subdivision. She went door to door with glossy flyers, promising order, beauty, and raising property values. Translation: more rules, more control, and absolutely no fun. When she knocked on my door, she looked at me, then at my oak tree behind me like it was some wild animal I was irresponsibly harboring. "This place has potential," she said, forcing a smile. "Once we clean it up and unify the aesthetic." "Clean it up?" I asked, leaning on the doorframe. "You mean the trash cans, or my face, or the giant tree behind me?" Her eyes flicked up at the massive branches, shading half the street. That tree had been there long before any HOA, long before most of us were born. "That tree is very dominant," she said carefully. "It disrupts the visual symmetry. It's imposing on the streetscape." I chuckled. "It's an oak tree, not a supervillain." She didn't laugh. That was my first warning sign. A week later, she won the election in a landslide. Most people voted for her because they thought, how bad can it be? Spoiler, pretty bad. The first thing she did as president was send out a 32-page updated community standards packet. 32 pages about lawn height, acceptable curtain colors, approved mailbox models, and a full-page section on visual obstructions. My oak tree fit that category a little too perfectly. I read that line 3 times. Any tree, shrub, or structural element that obstructs uniform sightlines, HOA signage, or the cohesive aesthetic of the community may be subject to mandatory removal at the discretion of the HOA board. At the bottom, handwritten in pink ink, was a note addressed specifically to me. "We'll need to discuss your oak tree, Karen. You know that feeling when your stomach drops but your brain goes, nah, it'll be fine." Yeah, that's where I was. A few days later, I got the first official violation notice taped neatly to my front door. "Your oak tree drops excessive leaf litter onto the sidewalk, poses a potential hazard to HOA signage visibility, and casts disproportionate shade onto neighboring properties. Please submit a removal plan within 14 days, or fines will be applied." I stared at the paper, then at the tree, then at my dog Buddy, who was happily chewing a stick under its branches. "A hazard to signage," I muttered. "What's next?" "The clouds block HOA-approved sunlight." I decided to do something Karen clearly hadn't anticipated. I read the actual law. Turns out that oak tree wasn't just old, it was legally protected. County records listed it as a heritage tree over 100 years old. Removal required special permits, environmental review, and a very good reason involving genuine safety. Not, "It hurts my eyes when I drive past." I printed out everything: codes, regulations, photos from the county archive, and showed up at the next HOA meeting. The room was full of folding chairs, stale coffee, and neighbors trying to look interested. Karen sat at the front behind a little plastic nameplate that read, "Ho President." She'd definitely bought that herself. "Next item," she announced, flipping her agenda. property at 142 Oak Hollow Lane, tree removal non-compliance. That's me, I said, standing up. And that's my tree. Karen clasped her hands together. Sir, your tree violates the updated visual harmony guidelines and obstructs the HOA welcome sign. You were given 14 days to comply. With respect, I said, holding up my folder, this tree is listed as a protected heritage oak. I've confirmed with the county. It cannot be removed without a permit, and no one's getting a permit because it's healthy, stable, and not causing any structural danger. She blinked. The HOA has authority over landscaping decisions. Over landscaping, yes, I replied. Not over county law, and certainly not over a 100-year-old heritage tree. Legally, it stays. A couple of neighbors shifted in their seats, clearly enjoying the show. Karen's smile thinned. You're choosing to be difficult. I'm choosing to follow the law, I said, and keep a piece of history on my property. Her mask cracked for just a second. I saw the flash of anger in her eyes before she smoothed it over. The board will review this further, she said sharply. Meeting adjourned. Of course, review this further meant plot ways to get rid of it anyway. Over the next few weeks, I got more notices, complaints about blocked sunlight on the HOA sign, allegations that falling leaves were a slip hazard, a ridiculous claim that squirrels from my tree were trespassing into other yards. One Saturday, I caught Karen standing on the sidewalk, hands on hips, glaring up at the tree like it had personally insulted her. You know, she called out when she saw me, this tree is costing you a lot of goodwill. Goodwill? From who? I asked. You, from the community, she said. People talk. They want a tidy, unified look. Your tree is stubborn, perfect. I smiled. It matches me. She huffed. This isn't a joke. That tree is going to come down one way or another. Not legally, I replied, and definitely not on your say-so. Looking back, that was the moment the line was drawn. She wasn't just annoyed anymore. She was obsessed. A couple of neighbors quietly warned me later. She keeps bringing up your tree in every meeting, one said. Like, every meeting, drainage issue, somehow your tree, mailbox height, somehow your tree again. Another whispered. She said something about taking matters into her own hands if the board doesn't act. I installed extra lighting near the tree and made sure my security cameras were pointed at the front yard. Legally, I was covered. Morally, I was fine. But I'd lived under HOA long enough to know when someone power-hungry decides you're the problem, you're not just living in a neighborhood, you're living on a battlefield. I made one more call. Just in case things got crazier, I contacted the sheriff's office. The sheriff was a practical guy, mid-50 seconds, tired eyes, but sharp. He came by one afternoon, stood under the oak with me, and nodded slowly. Beautiful tree, he said. We don't get many of these left. That's what I've been saying, I replied. HOA wants it gone. He snorted. HOA doesn't outrank county law. That's what I told them. Didn't help. He took a few photos, jotted down a note. If anyone tries anything illegal, give us a call. This is technically protected. Cutting it down without a permit, that's a problem. I didn't know then how important that visit would become. Because while I was gathering laws and logic, Karen was gathering something else entirely, contractors, the kind who don't ask questions if you pay cash and tell them the owner already approved it. I went to bed one night under the familiar rustle of the oak leaves, the branches swaying gently over my roof like they had my whole life. By the time the sun came up, that sound was gone, and so was the tree. I woke up the next morning feeling wrong, like the air was too still, too open. My bedroom was usually dark at sunrise because the oak's massive branches filtered the morning light, turning everything a soft gold. But that morning, sunlight blasted straight through my blinds like a spotlight at a crime scene. My first thought was, did someone trim a branch? My second thought was, no, she wouldn't. I threw on a shirt, rushed outside barefoot, and froze. My oak tree, my century-old, county-protected, family history carrying oak tree, was nothing but a stump. A raw, jagged, brutally cut stump, still wet with sap that glistened in the morning light like a wound. Sawdust littered the lawn, thick enough to leave footprints in. Deep, fresh tracks from a truck or trailer cut across my yard. Branches lay in piles like corpses. My heart slammed in my chest. No, 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 no. I knelt and touched the stump. The wood was cold, Recently cut, maybe only hours old. That's when I noticed something else. My security camera, the one pointed at the oak, was turned completely sideways, facing the sky, not torn down, not smashed, just rotated upward as if someone deliberately avoided being filmed. I felt a burn in my throat, rage mixed with disbelief. Then I heard her, "Well," Karen's voice chirped behind me. "Doesn't that look better?" I turned. She stood on the sidewalk, arms crossed, wearing her usual pink blazer that somehow made her look even more antagonistic in the daylight. "You did this," I said, barely recognizing my own voice. "I authorized it," she corrected smugly. "The board agreed the tree violated multiple HOA guidelines. Consider this an improvement to the community aesthetic. You don't have the authority to remove a protected tree," I shouted. "This is illegal." She waved her hand dismissively. "Please. That protected nonsense only applies if the tree is structurally sound, and I have reports that it was leaning dangerously. Don't worry, you'll thank me when your property value increases." I stepped closer. "You forged a danger report, didn't you?" "Proof?" she asked sweetly. "I swear, if Buddy the dog hadn't trotted out just then, barking at the stump in confusion, I might have forgotten the concept of self-control entirely." I pulled out my phone. "I'm calling the sheriff." Her smile flickered, but only for a second. "Do what you must." "But the job is already done." She walked away, humming. Actually humming. I dialed the sheriff with shaking fingers. He picked up quickly. "Morning. What's going on?" "She cut it down," I said. "The oak. It's gone." There was a long pause. "I'll be there in 10 minutes. And he meant it. His SUV rolled up fast, crunching over leftover bark on the street. When he stepped out and saw the stump, he froze. "Good Lord," he muttered. He took off his hat, scratched his head. "That tree was perfectly healthy." "I know. And nobody pulled a permit. I checked just last week." "I know." He knelt down, examined the cut, the sawdust, the tire marks. "This was done maybe 2-3 hours ago." He followed the trail with his eyes down the street. "They dragged the trunk away." "She hired contractors," I said. "Probably paid cash." He stood up and looked at me seriously. "This isn't a civil issue anymore. This is destruction of protected property. And if she touched that security camera, she did." He nodded once. "Okay, I'll open a case. We'll find who did this." For a moment, I felt relief, like justice was finally stepping into the ring. But justice must have hit snooze that morning, because just as the sheriff and I were discussing next steps, we heard the grinding sound of a truck engine, struggling under a heavy load. The noise grew louder as it approached from around the corner. A flatbed truck rolled into view. On the back of it, chained at 3 points, was the entire trunk of my oak tree, massive, heavy, and way too big for that truck. Behind it, walking proudly like she was leading a parade, was Karen. "Oh, perfect timing," she called out. "We're relocating it to a disposal site. It's all under control." The sheriff glared at her. "Karen, stop that truck right now." She blinked innocently. "Oh, is there an issue? You illegally removed a protected tree. You tampered with security equipment, you trespassed, and you forged safety reports." Her face twitched. "That's absurd. I have full authority as HOA president. You don't outrank county law," the sheriff snapped. She turned toward the nervous-looking truck driver and waved her arm impatiently. "Go on, move it." The driver hesitated. "Ma'am, it's not balanced. If we hit a slope, just go," she shrieked. He swallowed hard, shifted the truck into gear, and drove slowly forward. My house sits on a gentle incline, barely noticeable to the eye, but enough to matter when you're hauling something as heavy as a century-old oak trunk. The moment the truck's back wheels hit the slope, the entire load shifted. The chains groaned, metal scraped, the bed tilted. Karen screamed. "What are you doing?" I said. "Drive straight." And then it happened. The trunk rolled, slow at first, like a giant waking up, then faster, far faster, gaining momentum down the incline. "Move," the sheriff yelled, grabbing me and pulling me aside. The oak trunk barreled past us like a runaway boulder from an action movie, gathering speed until it slammed launched directly into the side of the sheriff's house across the street. The crash was deafening. Wood splintered, glass shattered, the entire structure shook. A cloud of dust exploded from the roof as the trunk punched through the wall and lodged itself halfway inside the living room. For a moment, the world went silent. Then the sheriff's wife burst out the front door in her bathrobe, screaming, "What in the hell is going on?" The sheriff just stared at the wreckage, hands on his hips, breathing slowly. He didn't yell, he didn't curse, he just stood there, reaching the absolute limit of human patience. Karen, meanwhile, was frozen in horror, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. It was the slope, she stammered. The driver he mishandled. Ma'am, the sheriff said calmly, you are done talking. He pulled out his notebook in that terrifyingly controlled way officers do when they're seconds away from losing it. I will need your statement, he said, but not right now. Right now, I need to not be arrested myself for what I'm thinking. He walked toward the wrecked house, muttering something about stress leave. Neighbors began pouring out of their homes, filming everything, whispering loudly enough for us all to hear. That tree was protected, she finally snapped. She's gonna get sued into another dimension. Did you see the trunk go, like a bowling ball? That's karma right there. And right there, in the middle of the chaos, Karen realized the gravity of what she'd done. Not just to me, not just to herself, but to the sheriff. She started shaking. I didn't mean it wasn't supposed to. I stepped toward her. She flinched. You said the job was already done, I reminded her quietly. Turns out you were right. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. That confident, bossy, power-hungry tone she always carried was gone. All that remained was panic. For the first time since she moved into our neighborhood, Karen had no idea what to say. And as the sheriff walked back toward us with a look that promised legal thunderstorms, I realized something. This was only the beginning. If you've ever witnessed someone try to talk their way out of a disaster they single-handedly created, you'll understand what happened next. Karen stood there, trembling, mascara slightly smudged, hands shaking like she'd just been caught robbing a bank, which, honestly, wasn't far off from what she'd done. The sheriff closed his notebook and took one long, slow breath. The kind people take when they're deciding between screaming, crying, or quitting their job altogether. Karen, he said, voice dangerously calm. Do you have any idea what you've done? She swallowed, hard. It was meant to be a community improvement project. The sheriff blinked at her. A community improvement project. Yes, she said, clinging to the phrase like a life raft. The tree was interfering with neighborhood cohesion. I acted in the best interest of the HOA. He held up a hand, shutting her down instantly. That was a protected heritage oak. You cut it down without a permit, you trespassed, you tampered with private security equipment, and now, he turned slowly toward the gaping, trunk-sized hole in his house. Now it's sitting in my living room. Karen's lips trembled. The driver misjudged the incline. The sheriff whipped around, pointing at the flatbed driver. You stay right there. The poor guy raised both hands. Sir, I told her the load wasn't secure. She said she'd handle the paperwork and that's enough, the sheriff snapped. The driver shut up immediately. At this point, half the neighborhood had formed a semicircle around the scene. Moms in robes, dads with coffee mugs, kids filming on their phones, retirees leaning on their walkers like they were watching the best entertainment they'd seen in years. And to be fair, this was the most excitement our street had experienced since the great mailbox vandalism incident of 2014. Neighbor Hashone whispered loudly. She'll never wiggle out of this, neighbor #2 whispered louder. HOA insurance is gonna laugh her straight into bankruptcy, neighbor #3 added. I hope she kept the receipt for that pink blazer. I would have laughed if I weren't still staring at the stump in my yard, the painful, ugly reminder that my tree was gone forever. The sheriff turned back to me. I'm going to need your camera footage, even if they tampered with it. Yeah, I said quietly. It was rotated upward, he frowned. Rotated is good, means fingerprints. Then he glared directly at Karen. You touched his camera, didn't you? She stiffened. That's an allegation? We'll see, he said. Crime lab will tell us. Karen's attempt at indignation faded. Her face drained of color like she realized she just stepped into a legal minefield barefoot. The sheriff pointed at the stump again. You removed that tree illegally. I was told I had the authority as HOA president, she insisted. By who? The board. Oh really? The sheriff said, pulling out his phone. Let's find out. He dialed one of the board members, Sandra, the treasurer. She answered immediately. Sheriff, is everything okay? Sandra, did the board authorize removal of the oak tree at 142 Oak Hollow? There was a pause, a very ominous one. Absolutely not, she said firmly. We voted unanimously to table the issue until a county inspector could come. Karen said she'd handle communication. Oh, she handled it, the sheriff muttered. Thank you. When he hung up, he stared Karen down. You forged board authorization? That's a misunderstanding, she whispered. No, he said. A misunderstanding is forgetting your Wi-Fi password? This is tampering with official documents. Karen's breathing got shallow. Sheriff, please, let me explain. He held up a finger, silencing her. And here's where everything got worse for her. One of the other neighbors stepped forward, Mr. Jensen, who lives across the street. I have something, he said, raising his phone. My doorbell camera caught the workers arriving at 3 a.m. Karen blanched. You have no right to record. It's my front door, he snapped. And you walked right past it, instructing the crew. He pressed play. There she was, in the darkness, whisper yelling. Faster. I want that thing gone before sunrise. Ignore the paperwork, I run this subdivision. The crowd gasped. Someone whispered, she really said that. Someone else said, ooh, she's finished. The sheriff didn't even react. He just stared at her long enough for sweat to form at her temples. But the nail in the coffin came from the contractor himself. The driver finally stepped forward, guilt all over his face. Sir, I didn't want to take this job, he said. But she paid cash and signed the authorization herself. Said she was the homeowner and had full rights over the tree. I blinked. She claimed she lived here. He nodded. She told us the owner was out of town and left her in charge. The entire neighborhood erupted. Karen threw her hands up. They're lying. This is a conspiracy. The sheriff's voice cut through the noise. Karen, you impersonated a homeowner. I delegated authority, HOA, bylaw. 73B, states. Bylaw, 73B, he repeated flatly. The one about Christmas lights duration. She froze. He smirked. You don't even know your own bylaws. Karen tried again. This is all blown out of proportion. It was just a tree. Just a tree, I said, stepping forward. That tree was 100 years old. My grandfather planted it with his own hands. Karen looked between me and the stump and the wreckage of the sheriff's house, desperation starting to warp her voice. It was obstructing community harmony, she protested weakly. Ma'am, the sheriff said, the only thing obstructing community harmony is you. He finally pulled out his citation book. Karen, you are facing unlawful destruction of protected property, trespassing, evidence tampering, falsifying HOA documentation, impersonating a homeowner, and reckless endangerment. And that's just the short list. She swayed slightly, like her legs were giving out. Sheriff, please, can we talk privately? No, he said curtly, we cannot. But the unraveling wasn't over. Sandra, the treasurer, arrived, speed-walking from her car with fury in her eyes. She marched straight up to the sheriff. She emptied the HOA emergency maintenance fund, Sandra said breathlessly. $8,000? Gone. She used it to pay those contractors. Karen gasped. It was a community emergency. To who? Sandra yelled. No one voted on this. You falsified signatures. Another neighbor chimed in. She threatened to fine me for having a blue wind chime. She tried to ban my garden gnomes. She said my shed was aggressively beige. She told me my dog barked in a non-HOA compliant tone. The sheriff now looked like a man who'd discovered the final circle of HOA hell. He held out his hand to Karen. Your HOA president badge? What? She whispered. You're removed from office, effective immediately. She clutched her chest. You can't fire me. I didn't, he said calmly. Your neighbors did. As he pointed around, every resident present nodded in agreement. Some even crossed their arms. One lifted his coffee mug in a sarcastic salute. Karen spun, pleading to the crowd. You're all turning against me. After everything I've done for this neighborhood. What have you done besides terrorize us? Someone muttered. The sheriff closed his notebook. Karen, until further notice, you are not allowed to make any decisions, filings, or actions on behalf of the HOA. She shook her head wildly. This isn't over. I'll sue all of you. I'll sue the HOA. I'll sue. You can add that to the long list of bad ideas you've had today, the sheriff said. He turned to me. We're opening a full investigation. This is going to get her into serious legal trouble. I looked again at the stump. Then, at the broken house across the street, my beautiful oak tree's final resting place. Karen had tried to destroy something sacred to me. Instead, she destroyed herself. But the investigation had only just begun. I didn't want to spend my afternoon watching the neighborhood collapse into some kind of HOA-themed courtroom drama, but that's exactly what it was turning into. The sheriff had barely finished listing Karen's potential charges when two more neighbors came hustling down the street, one holding a laptop, the other waving a folder stuffed with papers like he'd been waiting years for this moment. "I have the financial reports," the man with the folder announced triumphantly. "And I have the meeting recordings," the woman with the laptop added. Karen's face drained even further if that was humanly possible. She staggered back a step. What reports? What recordings?" The man flipped through the stack, his fingers trembling from equal parts adrenaline and excitement. "The HOA financial records for the last 6 months. You said they were all clean. Except here's the fun part. Half the receipts are handwritten, no vendor names, no signatures, just random charges marked as aesthetic improvements." The sheriff raised an eyebrow. "Is that so?" The woman with the laptop popped it open. "And you're going to love this. Remember those board meetings you said you conducted in closed session?" She clicked play. "Turns out you forgot to turn off your own Zoom recording feature." On the screen appeared Karen, alone in a room decorated with her trademark pink aesthetic. She sat at a table with 3 empty chairs. "Meeting of the HOA board is now in session," Video Karen declared dramatically. "All present." She paused, then answered herself, "Yes, President Karen." Someone in the crowd snorted. Another whispered, "She held meetings with invisible people." Karen lunged toward the laptop, but the woman snapped it shut and held it away. "Nope, this is evidence now." The sheriff let out a sigh so deep I thought he might pass out. "Karen, please tell me you did not fabricate board meetings." I was simulating discussions, preparing minutes in advance." "Simulating isn't how governance works," he said. "That's what's the legal term again. Oh, right, fraud." Karen looked around like she expected someone, anyone, to defend her. But every face she met stared back with some flavor of disgust, shock, or quiet satisfaction. Then came the contractor's assistant, the young guy with grease stains on his jeans. He had his phone in hand. "Sir, I recorded our call," he said to the sheriff. "She said she was the homeowner, said she was renovating the yard, told us to come between 2 and 4 a.m., so the neighbors wouldn't interfere." He pressed play. Karen's voice filled the air. "Do not come during daylight. I don't want the neighbors sticking their noses into my improvements. The owner authorized this long ago, they just forgot to file paperwork." The sheriff slowly turned toward Karen. "You lied about being the homeowner. It was a misunderstanding," she whimpered. "It was a felony," he corrected. She swayed again, clutching her forehead like she might faint. Honestly, at that point it might have been her best strategy. But the hits kept coming. The HOA treasurer Sandra opened her purse and pulled out a folder. "And here's the forged signatures," she said. "Karen, these don't even look like our names. One of them is literally just the word board, written in cursive." The sheriff held up the paper. "You signed as John Boardman." "There is no John Boardman," Karen whispered. It sounded official at the time. Someone in the crowd called out, "Did you also elect Mr. Boardman during one of your imaginary meetings?" The entire neighborhood burst into laughter. Except Karen, she looked like a castle made of pink jello melting in the sun. But even after everything, the forged meetings, the fabricated documents, the unauthorized spending, what really pushed the investigation over the edge were the phone records. You see, a quiet neighbor named Lisa had been collecting data for years. She stepped forward now, holding a printed call log. "These are all the calls Karen made to contractors over the last month. She contacted 7 companies, asking for immediate overnight removal of a dangerous tree. When 6 refused, she doubled the offer to the 7th. The sheriff scanned the papers, paid in cash." Lisa nodded. "The driver already confirmed it, and there's video of Karen handing over an envelope at 2:43 a.m. Karen's shoulders collapsed. She no longer looked angry or confident or self-righteous, just small and terrified. "I was trying to do something good for the community," she whispered. "Everyone always complains. I just wanted everything to be perfect." "At the cost of breaking the law?" I asked. She didn't answer. The sheriff stood there, shaking his head slowly. "All right, we're done here for now. I'll be filing an official report. This is major. I recommend you get a lawyer." Karen stiffened. "A lawyer," "Sheriff, please, this is all being blown out of proportion. You destroyed protected property," he said. "You falsified documents, and you caused severe damage to my home. You can't put that on me." She cried. That was the truck driver. The sheriff leveled her with a glare that could have cracked concrete. "You authorized the move, you ignored his warnings, you insisted it be done quietly before sunrise. That makes you responsible?" Her voice rose in panic. "No, it was an accident." He lowered his voice. "Accidents still have consequences." That line echoed across the street, but then something unexpected happened, something that changed the tone entirely. A neighbor stepped forward, a quiet older man named Ron, who'd lived there longer than anyone except me. "I have something else," he said. "Karen came to my house last week, asking me to complain about the tree. She offered to waive my HOA dues for 3 months if I filed a fake nuisance report." Karen gasped. "That's a lie." Ron held up his phone. "I recorded the conversation." Karen stumbled backward like she'd been struck. Why would you record that?" "Because you've been trouble since the day you moved in," Ron replied. "And I had a feeling it would come to this." The sheriff rubbed his forehead. "This is unbelievable. Every second I stand here, something worse comes out." I stepped closer, finally finding my voice after watching all this unfold. "Sheriff, what happens next?" He looked around at the chaos, the stump, the shattered house, the crowd, the trembling former HOA tyrant. "Well," he said, "first I file charges, then the county steps in, then the insurance companies, and then—" He glanced at Karen. "Then her world gets very, very small." Karen burst into tears, not polite tears, but loud, hiccuping sobs that echoed off the houses. "They're all lying," she shrieked. "I was trying to help. I was trying to make the neighborhood better." "No," the sheriff said firmly. "You were trying to make it yours." The crowd murmured in agreement. I looked at the stump again. The loss hit me fresh, a punch in the gut. That tree had survived storms, drought, and over a century of history, only to fall to a pink-blazered wannabe dictator. But justice wasn't finished yet. The sheriff cleared his throat. "Folks, we're scheduling an emergency HOA meeting tomorrow evening at the community center. We'll go over finances, documents, elections, and next steps. Everyone should attend." The crowd nodded. Rumors started flying immediately. Plans, questions, gossip all swirling like a storm. But no one left without giving Karen at least one last dirty look. She backed away from them, trembling, attempting to maintain some shred of dignity. I still have rights," she said weakly. "Yes," the sheriff said. "You do, and so does everyone else. You forgot that part." He turned to me. "I'll need a full statement from you later." "I'll be there," I said quietly. Karen staggered toward her house, hands covering her face, shoulders shaking. For the first time since she moved in, she looked defeated. But I knew this wasn't the end, not by a long shot. Legal wheels were turning now, and once they start, they don't stop easily. The oak tree was gone, the sheriff's house was half destroyed, the HOA was in shambles, and tomorrow everything would come to a head at the most chaotic HOA meeting our neighborhood had ever seen. The next day felt like the calm before a hurricane, one of those eerie, unsettling moments when the air is too still, the neighborhood too quiet, and everyone is waiting for something explosive to happen. Even Buddy, usually energetic in the mornings, paced around the stump of the oak tree like he sensed the tension hanging over the street. The emergency HOA meeting wasn't until 6 p.m., but the whole neighborhood felt restless long before that. People gathered in small clusters on driveways, whispering about audits, lawsuits, and fines so big Karen might need to sell that pink blazer on eBay just to pay the legal fees. By noon, I saw the sheriff outside his damaged house, pacing the yard with his insurance adjuster. The adjuster kept taking photos and shaking his head like he was witnessing the aftermath of a tornado. "This is what caused it," he asked, pointing at the massive trunk lodged in the wall. "The HOA president," the sheriff replied flatly. "She authorized an illegal removal and got the tree rolling down the street like an Olympic bobsled." The adjuster blinked. "This is the weirdest claim I've ever seen." "Oh, Buddy," the sheriff said, clapping him on the shoulder. "You have no idea." I watched from across the street, guilt gnawing at me even though I wasn't the one who caused the destruction. The sheriff caught me looking and walked over. "You feeling okay?" he asked. "Still processing," I admitted. Seeing the stump this morning hurt more than yesterday. Like the reality finally settled in. He nodded. I get it. Trees like that, they're more than wood. They're memories. We stood there in silence for a moment. You ready for tonight? He finally asked. I exhaled. As ready as I'll ever be. He leaned in slightly. I'm telling you now, tonight's meeting won't just be a discussion. I'm presenting everything, and she's going to panic. Stay calm, don't engage unless necessary. Got it, and one more thing. He lowered his voice. She's been calling around trying to gather support, bribing some, intimidating others. If she tries anything tonight, I'll shut it down. I raised an eyebrow. She still thinks she can get out of this. Oh, she's convinced she can flip the narrative, he said. People like her always think they're one speech away from redemption. He wasn't wrong. At exactly 6 p.m., the community center parking lot was so full it looked like we were hosting a concert instead of an HOA meeting. People spilled onto the sidewalk, holding coffee mugs, notepads, and because it's suburbia, several emotional support snacks. When I walked inside, conversation stopped mid-sentence as neighbors spotted me. Some nodded in sympathy, others patted me on the back. One guy even handed me a homemade brownie and whispered, "For emotional stability, I appreciated it more than I'd admit." The room buzzed with energy, some angry, some eager, some downright gleeful. The front table, where the board usually sat, had only 2 members, Sandra the treasurer and Miguel, the landscape coordinator. Both looked exhausted. Then, like a villain entering at the perfect dramatic moment, Karen walked in. She wore a different pink blazer, brighter, louder, and even more aggressively tailored than the last. Her hair was shellacked into a helmet-like shape, and she carried a thick binder under her arm, labeled important OA documents in sparkly letters. The room fell silent. She paused, scanning the crowd with an expression that tried to be confident, but came across as terrified beneath the veneer. Still, she forced a smile. "Good evening, neighbors," she said, voice quivering just enough to betray her. No one responded. She cleared her throat. "I know there has been some confusion regarding recent landscaping improvements." "Illegal landscaping improvements?" someone shouted from the back. Karen's smile froze. "We'll address that misunderstanding shortly. But first, as your HOA president," Sandra slammed her hand on the table so loudly that half the room jumped. "You are not our HOA president anymore," she said. Gasps filled the room. Karen visibly flinched, gripping her binder tightly. "You can't remove me without a formal vote," she snapped. "We did vote," Miguel said coldly. "Unanimous. Yesterday, after the sheriff informed us of the forged documents." "That wasn't an official meeting," Karen protested. "Where are the minutes? Where are the signatures?" Sandra smirked. "Funny you ask. We actually held a real meeting, with real people, not 3 empty chairs and a Zoom recording of you talking to yourself." A wave of laughter rolled through the room like thunder. Karen's cheeks reddened. "This is an ambush," she yelled. "I demand we return to proper HOA procedure." "You don't get to demand anything," Sandra said. "You are relieved of all authority until further notice." The sheriff entered then, carrying a folder thick enough to be used as a weapon. He walked straight to the front, nodded to the board members, then faced the crowd. "Evening, folks," he said. "We've got a lot to cover. Let's begin." Karen shot to her feet. "Sheriff, I should be allowed to speak first. This is a matter of my leadership, my intentions, and my vision for the community." He held up a hand. "Karen, sit." She scowled but sat, the way a toddler sits after being told no in the candy aisle. The sheriff opened his folder. "I'll keep this simple. The investigation has uncovered multiple violations, including unauthorized removal of a protected tree, trespassing, tampering with private security equipment, falsifying HOA documents, misuse of HOA funds, forgery of board signatures, and reckless endangerment resulting in significant property damage." The room erupted in whispers and gasps. Karen sprang up again. "Those are exaggerated charges. I was following HOA guidelines, and everyone here knows that tree was an eyesore and—" "Sit," the sheriff repeated, voice like steel. She sat. He continued, "We've collected video evidence, phone recordings, contractor statements, and financial documents. Everything points to a deliberate attempt to bypass legal procedures." He turned toward me. A good portion of the evidence came from the homeowner directly affected. All heads turned to me. I nodded once. Karen slammed her hands on the table. "Of course, he turned you against me. He's been complaining about me since day one. I frowned. You broke into my yard at 3 in the morning. That's not the point, she shrieked. You also turned my camera upward to avoid detection, I added. That doesn't prove anything. It proves fingerprints, the sheriff said. Which we have. Karen froze, utterly still. The sheriff placed several photos on the table. Ladies and gentlemen, here is the contractor accepting cash from Ms. Karen at 2:43 a.m. Here is Karen directing the workers, and here, he held up a screenshot from the doorbell camera, is Karen explaining that she is the homeowner and wants the work done before sunrise. The crowd exploded. She lied about being the owner. She paid in cash. She pretended to be all of us at meetings. My God, I knew she was crazy, but this is next level. Miguel stood. I moved to remove Karen from the HOA board permanently. Seconded, Sandra said. All in favor? Miguel asked. Every hand in the room shot up, except Karen's. She looked around desperately. You can't do this. You need my leadership. I brought order to this neighborhood. We don't want your order, someone called out. We want our sanity back, another added. Karen lifted her binder. I have documentation, records, proof that I acted within my rights. The sheriff held out his hand. Let me see those. No, she snapped, hugging the binder to her chest. These are private. Karen, he warned, you are obstructing an investigation. Her eyes darted around the room. You're all against me. Every one of you. Her voice cracked. You're just jealous because I care about this neighborhood. A neighbor near the front muttered loudly. If this is caring, I'd hate to see what dictatorship looks like. The room roared with laughter. Karen trembled, face red, breath shallow. This isn't justice. This is harassment. No, the sheriff said calmly. This is accountability. He placed a stack of official documents on the table. Karen, effective immediately. You are banned from holding any HOA office. Further, you are liable for financial restitution pending legal review. She stumbled backward. Restitution? Yes, Sandra said coldly. You owe the HOA $8,000 for the unauthorized contractor payment. And, the sheriff added, you owe me for the damage to my house. Karen's jaw dropped. Me? That tree rolled accidentally? Accident caused by your negligence, he said. And, I spoke up, you owe me for my oak tree. Her eyes snapped to me with pure hatred. Your stupid tree started all of this. No, I said quietly, your choices did. Karen stood there, shaking like her entire world was collapsing, which, honestly, it was. But even then, even with the entire neighborhood voting her out, even with evidence stacked against her like a pink-themed crime museum exhibit, she still tried one last desperate move. I'll sue everyone, she yelled. I'll get this whole neighborhood shut down. She never finished, because the sheriff simply closed his folder and said, Karen, you've done enough. Silence fell over the room, and in that silence, she realized the battle was over. Karen didn't leave the meeting gracefully. She didn't even leave quietly. Instead, she stood there in the center of the community center, chest heaving, face twisted, fingers clutching the edges of her sparkly binder like it contained the nuclear codes. For a moment, she looked like she might lunge at someone, me, the sheriff, Sandra, maybe even the projector screen, but then her shoulders dropped. Her gaze fell to the floor, and with a broken little sniff, she whispered, You'll regret this. All of you will. No one responded. She gathered her papers with trembling hands, shoved them into her binder, and marched toward the exit. People stepped aside, the way villagers might part for a cursed queen leaving her ruined castle. She pushed through the doors, nearly tripping over a doormat, and disappeared into the night. The door swung closed behind her with a soft thud that felt strangely symbolic, like the end of an era. A terrible, pink-blazered era. The room exhaled collectively. Sandra sagged into her chair. I need a drink, or 5. Miguel wiped his forehead. We survived, barely. The sheriff looked drained but resolute. We're not done yet. He turned to the crowd. Thank you all for coming. The county will handle the legal fallout. I'll file my full report tonight. And we're opening a formal audit on the HOA finances. The board will temporarily operate under volunteer oversight until we elect new officers. People nodded, murmured, exchanged relieved smiles. Someone clapped. Another followed. Suddenly the room erupted into applause. Not the polite kind, but the real kind. The exhausted, grateful, relieved kind. I stood off to the side, arms crossed. I wanted to feel triumphant, but the stump of my oak tree kept flashing in my mind, raw and mutilated. No amount of justice could bring it back. After the meeting dismissed, neighbors gathered around me one by one. "Sorry about your tree," one said. "She never should have touched it," another added. "That oak was part of the street's charm," someone else murmured. I appreciated the sympathy, but each comment was another twist in the wound. I just thanked them quietly. The sheriff approached me as people filtered out. "You did good tonight," he said. "I didn't do much. You stood your ground. You didn't let her push you around. That matters." I shrugged. "Still doesn't bring the tree back." He stared at me for a long moment, then said, "Come by my place tomorrow. We need to talk about next steps. The county arborist will be involved. There's compensation for heritage tree destruction. Might help you replant." "Maybe, but some things can't be replaced." I nodded and headed home. The night air was cool, the streetlights casting soft yellow halos on the pavement. I walked past the sheriff's house, the gaping wound in the wall covered now with a tarp. What a surreal sight. Then past my yard, where the stump sat under a halo of fallen sawdust, like a gravestone. When I stepped inside, Buddy greeted me, tail wagging, unaware of the emotional hurricane I'd just come through. I knelt and hugged him, burying my face in his fur. He licked my cheek and nudged my chin like he knew something was off. "Yeah," I whispered. "I miss it too." That night, I barely slept. I kept hearing the echo of the chainsaws in my head, the thud of the trunk crashing into the sheriff's wall, the panicked shouts of neighbors. But the image that haunted me most wasn't any of that. It was Karen's face, when she realized she'd truly lost everything. There was something almost tragic about it, like watching a fire burn itself out until nothing remains but ashes. The next morning, I brewed coffee and stared out the window at the stump. The grass around it was disturbed, soil upheaved, patches of sawdust still clinging to blades of grass. Birds hopped around the edges, confused, like they were waiting for their old friend to return. Around 10 a.m., the sheriff stopped by. He looked better than yesterday, tired, sure, but calmer. "Got a minute?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. Stepping outside, we walked toward the stump together. He crouched down, touched the cut surface, ran his hand along the jagged edge. "This tree was a beauty," he murmured. "Dense rings, strong heartwood, must be about 100, maybe more." 103, I said. "My grandfather planted it in 1921. He nodded slowly. "We'll include that in the report. Judges, they care more when there's a story behind the damage." He stood and wiped his hands. "County Environmental Services will evaluate the site next week. They'll calculate fines, restitution, replacement value. With heritage trees, the minimum penalty is steep, and because it was done intentionally, at night, and without any permit, Karen's in deep." I finished. He exhaled. "As deep as it gets for something like this." I looked across the street at his house. Construction tape marked the edges, workers already beginning repairs. He caught me staring. "Don't worry about my house," he said. "Insurance will cover the structural part, and legally, she's responsible for whatever they don't cover." I frowned. "Still feel bad it was my tree," he chuckled. "My roof needed replacing anyway. I was just procrastinating. Think of it as nature's aggressive reminder." I snorted. Nature had a little help. We walked back toward the street. The sheriff turned, hand on his hip. "We could use your voice at the next HOA election," he said. I blinked. "Come again. You kept your cool through all this. People trust you. You're reasonable. We need someone like that on the board to restore order." I shook my head. "I'm not the political type. This isn't politics," he said. "It's about making sure someone like Karen never gets control again." I paused, thought about it. About the neighborhood, the history, the tree. "I'll think about it." "Good," he said. "That's all I ask." The next few days rolled by in a strange mixture of relief, anger, and slow healing. Karen stayed out of sight, which was probably for the best. Rumor had it she'd hired a lawyer. Rumor also had it that the lawyer took one look at the evidence and immediately doubled his fee. One afternoon, I found a pink envelope taped to my door. For a moment, my stomach dropped old reflex. But it wasn't a violation notice. It was a handwritten letter. I tore it open. Inside was a short message. "You ruined my life, Karen. No apology, no accountability, just blame. I crumpled the letter and tossed it into the trash. Days later, more evidence surfaced: documents Karen had hidden in her garage, emails she sent to contractors, even threats she'd written to neighbors who didn't obey her aesthetic. Suggestions. The sheriff called to update me almost daily. "She's cooked," he said each time. And she was. Eventually, the county ruled on the case. She owed thousands in fines, restitution, and damages. She lost her court appeal. Her lawyer quit halfway through the process, and the HOA banned her permanently from holding any position, attending closed meetings, or influencing votes. But the most important part came a week later. The sheriff knocked on my door with a small smile. "We got approval?" "For what?" He pointed to the stump. "To replant a heritage oak seedling. The county will supply it. They said it's symbolic. A new beginning." A lump formed in my throat. Really? That weekend? The whole neighborhood came out, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Men dug the hole, kids carried watering cans, women brought snacks, even Buddy supervised with an air of responsibility. When we lowered the young oak into the ground, I felt a swell of emotion I couldn't describe. Hope, healing, continuity. The sheriff stood beside me. "Trees grow slow," he said, "but they grow strong." I nodded. "Just like communities," he smiled, "and unlike Karen, trees don't forge documents." We laughed together as the sun set behind the houses, casting golden light over the newly planted seedling. I realized something. Karen may have destroyed the tree, but the neighborhood had never been stronger, and just as slow, patient, steady had taken root again. The weeks after, the replanting felt strangely peaceful, almost too peaceful, like the neighborhood was collectively waiting to see if Karen would re-emerge from her pink lair with some new scheme. But she didn't. Maybe the lawsuits drained her energy, maybe the humiliation broke whatever illusion of power she once clung to, or maybe, just maybe, she finally realized the community wasn't hers to control. Life slowly returned to normal. Kids rode their bikes again without Karen threatening to fine their parents for reckless driveway usage. People walked their dogs without worrying she would measure their leash length. Garden gnomes, wind chimes, and decorative birdhouses made a triumphant return to front porches. It was like the entire neighborhood collectively exhaled and decided to simply live. But despite the calm, something still felt unfinished. There were loose ends, emotional ones, legal ones, things that hadn't yet found closure. About 2 weeks after planting the new oak, I got a call from the sheriff. "Can you come by my place?" he asked. "There's something you need to hear." When I arrived, he handed me a small folder with official county markings. "This is the final ruling," he said. I opened it. Page after page listed fines, restitution amounts, damage repair totals, and legal fees, all assigned to Karen. She tried to contest it. I asked. "Oh, every step," the sheriff said. "Appealed, protested, filed complaints, but the evidence was airtight." I skimmed the figures. "This is a lot." He crossed his arms. "Yep. Destruction of a protected tree alone carries a heavy penalty. Add falsifying documents, impersonating a homeowner, unauthorized use of HOA funds, and endangerment. She's lucky the judge didn't throw the book harder. What happens now? She pays, or the courts take action." I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness. No matter how awful she had been, seeing someone's life collapse this completely, it wasn't easy to celebrate. The sheriff must have read my expression. "You're too decent for your own good," he said. "Don't feel guilty for someone else's choices." "I don't feel guilty," I said slowly, "just reflective." He nodded. "Come on, let's walk." We stepped outside. The repairs on his house were nearly done. New siding, new windows, a fresh coat of paint. It looked better than before the tree ever hit it. He chuckled at my expression. Insurance came through big time. I'm not saying I'm glad a 100-year-old tree rolled into my living room, but my wife sure likes the remodel. She didn't kill you for it. Almost. Then she saw the new kitchen layout. We both laughed. We ended up walking toward my yard. The young oak seedling stood proudly in its spot, its leaves fluttering gently in the breeze. "It's already grown a little," I said. "Trees have a way of reminding us life keeps going," he murmured. "Even after chaos." As we talked, a few neighbors approached Sandra, Miguel, and Ron. "We're holding a quick meeting," Sandra said, "choosing new HOA leadership." I grimaced. Sheriff already tried to recruit me. Miguel nudged me. He's right, you know, you'd be good at it, Ron chimed in. Besides, after everything, we need someone sane. I laughed. What's in it for me? Power, Sandra said dramatically. Absolutely not, I replied. Okay, Miguel said. How about just attending the meeting? No pressure. Fine, I'll come. The community center was far less chaotic this time. People chatted in groups, exchanging recipes and gardening tips instead of accusations and legal threats. The tension that once hung over the neighborhood like a storm cloud had disappeared. Sandra called the meeting to order. We're here to nominate new leadership president, treasurer, and secretary. We want transparency, fairness, and ideally, no dictatorships. Soft laughter rippled through the room. Miguel read off the list of suggested candidates. My name was on it. I raised a hand. I'm flattered, but I'm not interested in being HOA president. A few people booed jokingly. However, I continued, I'd be willing to serve as a board member, not leading, just helping, making sure things stay reasonable. Applause filled the room, not thunderous, but warm and supportive. Sandra smiled. Motion accepted. And just like that, I became part of the HOA board. I wasn't sure how to feel about it. Responsibility wasn't something I sought out, but I also knew this neighborhood mattered to me. If my voice could prevent another Karen from rising, it was worth it. Later that evening, when the meeting was over, I walked home under the streetlights. The air felt lighter somehow. For the first time since the chaos began, I felt like things were truly settling. But the story wasn't quite done yet. There was still one unexpected moment left. The very next morning, I found an envelope on my porch. Unlike the previous pink one, this was white and plain. No glitter, no dramatic handwriting. Inside was a check, not from Karen, from the county, compensation for the heritage oak, plus an additional restoration grant, enough to plant not just one tree, but several, enough to fix the landscaping, redo the yard, make something new out of something lost. I held the check, stunned. The sheriff walked by just then and raised an eyebrow. Good news. Very, I said. I didn't know they did restoration grants. They do in special circumstances. You qualified. For the first time since the oak fell, I felt real joy. Guess this neighborhood is going to be a little greener, I said. You're welcome, he said with a grin, tipping his hat. Days later, we planted 2 more young oaks smaller than the first seedling, but full of promise. The neighbors pitched in again. Kids decorated the area with painted rocks. Someone put a tiny sign, in memory of the old giant, welcome to the new generation. As we finished watering the last sapling, I felt something shift inside me, a blend of closure and renewal. The sheriff clapped a hand on my shoulder. You did good, you know. Didn't feel like it for a while. That's how life is, he said. Sometimes the worst things lead to the best rebuilds. I looked out over the yard, the fresh soil, the rising saplings, the neighbors smiling and laughing. Maybe he was right. And as the sun dipped behind the houses, casting long shadows across the street, I whispered quietly to the memory of the old oak, we're starting again. Life has a way of breaking things we thought would last forever. Trees, trust, routines, even communities. But when something falls, it also opens the space for something new to grow. My oak tree lived for more than a century, and losing it felt like losing a part of myself. Yet, that loss brought my neighborhood together in a way nothing else ever had. It exposed truth, restored balance, and reminded us all that justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's patient, steady, and green as a new leaf. If there's one lesson I want you to take away, it's this. Stand up for what matters. Even when someone tries to cut it down, roots grow back, but only if you protect the soil. Tell me in the comments, what would you do if your neighbor tried to destroy something precious to you? And don't forget to subscribe for more wild HOA stories. There's always another Karen waiting around the corner.